Good morning and welcome to City Club Missoula's November Forum, New Missoulians, a spotlight on past, present, and future refugee resettlement. My name is Brett Rosenberg and I have the honor and privilege of serving as Director of the City Club Board let me start that over. What the heck am I? I am the Director of City Club's Board of Directors. And I'm super happy to be here today with so many of you. City Club's mission, as you all know, is to bring people together to inform and inspire on issues vital to the community through public forums that encourage the discussion of new ideas and the free exchange of thought. We have a deep commitment to civility and civil discourse even when we discuss challenging issues. Before I introduce our moderators, some thank yous are in order. Thank you to Missoula Community Access Television, which records our forums as part of their media assistance grants to nonprofit organizations. MCAT serves our community on cable channels 189 and 190 and live streams our forums on its local live platform as well. You can also find past City Club forums on our website by clicking on the video button at cityclubmissoula.com. Thanks also to our sponsors, in particular those at the executive level. They are the University of Montana, Blackfoot Communications, and First Security Bank. Our executive level sponsors are key partners in helping to expand our audience access and reliably plan and conduct our forums. We're grateful to all of our sponsors and we invite you to join them by going to our website. And of course, thanks to our board of directors and our administrator, Danny Howlett. City Club Missoula would also like to acknowledge that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. Today we honor the path they've always shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. Our moderator for today's panel is Dr. Donna Anderson. Donna has served as Senior International Officer and Executive Director of the Global Engagement Office at the University of Montana since 2019, and she served as SIO at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville prior to coming to Missoula. She is an international education administrator with over 25 years of experience in international higher education, working to create global opportunities, expand international components of teaching, research, and engagement activities, recruit and support the international students and scholars, provide education abroad opportunities, and facilitate development of international partnerships. She has studied abroad in former West Germany and has worked or traveled in more than 40 countries worldwide. Her interests include international student identity development and equity and inclusion in international education. And that's the bio that I had to cut. Donna will introduce our panelists, and I will see you at our break at roughly 12:25, at which point we'll begin table talk, and I'll explain that when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you all for having me here. I'm so happy to be serving as moderator today as we dive into the topic of refugee resettlement here in our wonderful community of Missoula. I have the privilege and honor of introducing our panelists and presenters today, and we'll do that now, and that will be followed with their presentations for us today to give us some food for thought as we begin our civil discourse and dialogue. So first, Mary Poole is co-founder and executive director of Soft Landing Missoula. In September of 2015, upon seeing the photos of Alan Kurdi, a 3-year-old who drowned fleeing the war in Syria, Mary was moved to try and do more to help refugees fleeing war and terror worldwide. With friends and community members, she formed the group Soft Landing Missoula, and they successfully worked to open Missoula's doors to refugees once again. In the past 6 years, Soft Landing Missoula has worked to build a welcoming, supportive, and informed community where refugees and immigrants can integrate and thrive. Our second presenter and distinguished panelist is Sarah Howerton. Sarah is the development manager at the International Rescue Committee, IRC, here in Missoula, where she works to support and strengthen the resettlement programs by overseeing the organization's volunteer programs, in-kind donations, fundraising, and community outreach efforts. She holds an MPA from the University of Colorado, Denver, where she studied nonprofit program management and spent a winter term in Uganda and Rwanda studying international development. Sarah enjoys Missoula's trail systems with her dogs and is dedicated to efforts that make Missoula an inclusive and welcoming place for all. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists, and I'll turn it over to Mary.
It's like not having your volume on when it's your time to Zoom. Thanks, guys, so much for coming today. Wow, that's super loud. It's really fun to see so many familiar faces out there. When we started this effort 7 years ago, I think there were many of you out there in the audience right there with us. So thanks for being with us here again 7 years later. Yeah, I'm going to keep my stuff pretty short. I'll give a little overview of how we all came to be here and a little bit about what Soft Landing does today. I think the point of today is to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions and dialogue at the end. So we started, like was said, about 7 years ago with kind of this question and this community effort. Is there more that we can be doing to help refugees worldwide? At the time, I don't have all the same accolades. You guys are amazing. I was an arborist for the city, so I was climbing a tree with a chainsaw. I had a 9-month-old little boy, my first son, and the photo of Alan Kurdi just struck me like nothing had before. And I think that it was really an awakening for me as a parent, and kind of for the first time as like how can I be a responsible community member and a responsible member of the world. And I was not alone in that. Like I said, a lot of you guys were there with us. And a small group of people started getting together just to help answer kind of some big questions. How can we support refugees and families fleeing really horrible situations? But we had to learn all about it first. We had to get on the computer and type in our Googles, what is a refugee, and learn the definition and figure out how the system worked. At the time that our effort was pulled together here in Missoula, Montana was just one of 2 states in the nation that did not have a path to welcome refugees. And so we could look around very easily and see that our community had done that before, but we didn't know how we had done that before. We didn't know what it looked like or the path. And we're really excited to have Sarah and the IRC here because lo and behold, in the end, that ended up being kind of the link in the chain that was missing. We had a really, really welcoming community, people that really wanted to make this happen. And we found out that in order to create that path, we had to bring a resettlement agency to Missoula. And that there's 9 resettlement agencies that are nonprofits that work with the federal government to create that path. And every community at that time that was welcoming refugees was doing that through one of those 9 organizations. So we took a little minute to try to get a hold of folks. It was really hard to do. It was a very busy time in the world of resettlement, but luckily we got a hold of the executive director of the Seattle office, Mr. Bob Johnson. And he became our champion and helped us work with the International Rescue Committee and open this office here in Missoula. And at that point, that's kind of when the IRC and the soft landing story starts to materialize. Sarah's going to talk about who the IRC is and what part of it they do here. This work is an incredible partnership all across our community. It's not just our organizations that are involved in this partnership. It's many, many, many. We tried to list them out on our new website, and it was, like 30, 40 different organizations that are involved in the work here. So it's a lot. But we are 2 of the key players. When we did get the IRC to come here and families began to come, it was in the summer of 2016. So it was about a week shy, actually, of that anniversary date of the photo of Alan Kurdi coming out. So it took about a year to welcome our first family. He stepped off the plane from the Democratic Republic of Congo. A cute story about that. Oh my gosh, I said I was going to keep it short, didn't I? This is actually a really cute story. That first week we were walking the family downtown to the farmer's market, and the mom looks around and and I just kind of hear her saying the word Missoula over and over again, and she's looking down this street and down that street. I'm like, oh, she's practicing this name of her new home. She's saying, Missoula, Missoula. I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I actually found out that she was saying a Swahili word, nzuri, which actually means good. And so both felt really great. And just like to know that this woman was just looking at every corner of her new home and just saying, good, good. And that's how our work has progressed over the last 7 years. You know, once the IRC said, okay, we're going to open an office here, and the families started coming, in our research that we had done over that last year, we saw that in communities where refugees were integrating well, where they were thriving, where the community itself was heavily involved, and there were other nonprofits engaged in that work. So we knew that resettlement cannot exist in a vacuum, and that there was still space for soft landing to be a part of that. And so we formed our own nonprofit, and we've been slowly, deliberately, with our community that we serve, developing our own specific programming over the last 6 years. We've landed in a couple of great areas that we feel really good about. One is we run a resource center. It's a walk-in center. Anyone can come at any time. It's the hub of our community in-kind donations. It's the hub of our adult services, where we help people with citizenship and driver's education and getting them connected with individual mentors throughout the community. And we also run a really robust youth program. We work with over 100 refugee and immigrant kiddos throughout the year. Our programs vary from after-school tutoring and recreational and social outings to a really robust summer full of chaos. That pretty much describes it best. But overnight camping trips and whitewater rafting and all the things. We're headed to the ice rink and skiing this winter again. So that's a really wonderful program. We also run United We Eat, which many of you may have heard about, but it's a food-based program. Really early on, when we didn't yet have an office, Molly and I would just run around town distributing all the wonderful things that the community wanted to give these families, like bikes and microwaves and coats, and you couldn't show up at someone's house without being invited in. And you weren't invited in without being sat down at a table and just like laid this, you're like, wait a second, it is 2:30 in the afternoon. How do you have this food ready? Like, why? Like, you didn't know I was coming, and it was just like this full meal. And we really quickly figured out that generosity and hospitality are just cornerstones of so many of the cultures of people that have come. And so many of the people that have come have been under the care of one aid organization or another for years, if not decades. And the easiest way that they felt they could give back to those that had welcomed them was through food. So we took that and, in good soft landing fashion, took it farther. And we now work with over 25 refugee and immigrant chefs, providing a weekly meal to our community. We serve about 175 take-home meals through our United We Eat at Home program. We also do supper clubs and cookie sales and virtual cooking classes, and it puts tens of thousands of dollars from your pockets directly into the pockets of the chefs that we work with. So I think last year it was about $27,000 that people took home from cooking with us. And then lastly, I don't have the yellow card up yet, so I'm going to keep going. Lastly, our program is heavily weighted on storytelling and telling those stories in the way that the folks and the families we work with want their stories told, in the amount of participation that they want to do, and what they want to talk about with you all. So that's part of our outreach program and events. We do all sorts of different social events throughout the year. And one of them that we did last welcoming week was, 2 welcoming weeks in a row now, was the Story of Home project. So it's over there if you guys want to peruse after eating. You can click the QR code and read like full, beautifully written, not by me, beautifully written stories for each of those folks. Part of what the folks with City Club wanted us to talk about today was this idea of success and, the success of refugees in our community. And I think that it's a really important thing to talk about, and I think it probably is a different idea than what a lot of people have. Yes, there are people here that have opened their own businesses. There are people here that employ others. There are people here that are engineers, that have doctorate degrees in linguistics, that came as physicians. But then there's also the mom who gets to watch her kids get on the bus for the very first time safely, and then she goes to her job at Walmart to make sure that her kids have clothes. And so I'd say, even that doctor first goes to his job at Walmart. So I'd say I would just invite people to think about success in different ways, and think about how it's just as important that we are able to invite and celebrate those that will never be doctors, will never be physicians, but are here for the very important reason of being a human that needs a safe home. And so with that, I'm going to keep it short so there's more time at the end, and invite Sarah to spiel away.
Now I get to figure this out.
Oh, I'm going to turn mine off. They're really loud.
Okay, can you hear me? Awesome. Thank you, Mary, for your presentation. And we at IRC are very, very grateful for Soft Landing for inviting us back into the Missoula community, and for all the work that they do beyond the things that we do through resettlement. So I'll just quickly run through, or as quickly as I can, because there's a lot of information about the IRC organization. Many people may or may not know that IRC Missoula is actually part of the larger IRC, which is a global organization at work in over 40 countries. Abroad, a lot of the work is focused on responding to humanitarian crises as they unfold and providing direct support and relief to people who have been displaced and affected by disaster, conflict, and persecution. But domestically in the U.S., as Mary mentioned, IRC is one of 9 agencies that works with the federal government to administer the U.S. refugee admissions programs. So IRC has 29 offices around the country, and we are lucky to have one here in Missoula. So as the resettlement agency, you can kind of think of us as a metaphor. We're sort of the gateway through which refugees come to Missoula, and we provide a lot of services in those first critical days that people are here that address basic and immediate needs. We have case management services. Every family or individual that arrives in Missoula has an IRC caseworker that they work with closely to sort of learn the ropes about life in this new and strange place. We have employment programs which provide job readiness training to prepare people for the U.S. workforce. It can be very different for them, and to help with job placement assistance. We have health programs where folks are connected with medical and mental health care providers, and we also do work with those the health communities to provide education on culturally competent care for the people that we serve. We have a housing program that helps people find both temporary and their first permanent meaning a long-term rental lease house here in Missoula, and help to get those items and furnishings needed for the house. And we do that largely through in-kind donations through our wonderful community. We get school-aged kiddos enrolled in schools. Younger kids, we help get enrolled in childcare. And navigating all of those systems. And as Mary said, there's so many partner agencies that we work with to make that happen, like the school system and Lifelong Learning Center and Soft Landing. Probably 30 or so organizations, you can't name them all. And lastly, we have an immigration services program where we help people to apply for green cards or family reunification, travel documents, applying for asylum, and helping people get connected to legal representatives for legal counseling and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of things that are going on, and most of this is required by the government to take place in the first 90 days that somebody is here. At the end of that 90 days, the expectation by the government program is that folks are ready to be self-sufficient, which is just, yeah, right?
A hum comes over the crowd.
Yeah. So, in some cases, 90 days is enough, but by and large, a lot of folks do need additional support, and not just financial support, but support in continuing to learn how to navigate the different systems here. So we do have some programs that go beyond the 90 days. We have a matching grant employment program, which helps people achieve self-sufficiency through employment. And then there's also, through the Montana State Office of Refugee Resettlement, there's a Refugee Support Services, or RSS, program that helps people for up to 5 years. Largely non-financial support, but there is some financial support, and extended case management services that currently our casework team at the IRC is working to build out, that will support people for up to 5 years. So a lot of options if that 90 days isn't enough. And during those 90 days, we are hoping to foster a rapid transition towards self-sufficiency, but again, we meet people where they're at and work with them with what they need. So some numbers, a lot of people ask us about, how many refugees have come to Missoula. And since opening in 2016, we've resettled approximately between 500 and 600 individuals. Usually it's about 100 per year, barring COVID, during which that time we saw very few arrivals. And in this most recent fiscal year, which ended in September, we had resettled 159 individuals. Which was the busiest year we've had yet. It was very exciting. 108 people from Afghanistan, 33 from Syria, 15 from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and 3 from Burma. Thank you. Thank you. And again, this is not possible without the help of Soft Landing and all of our other community partners. And during this most recent fiscal year, we had about 100 people enrolled in that matching grants support program. And at the end of that 6 months, 75% of people were considered economically self-sufficient, able to meet their own needs, which is a huge success. And we also helped about 100 individuals with various immigration services, green card applications, family reunifications, and asylum applications, that sort of thing. So a very, very busy year for us. And looking forward to the future, because I know this forum is also focused on, what does the future of resettlement look like, not just in Missoula, but in the country. Here we can expect to see 250 individuals this year. So it's going to be our busiest year yet. Thus far, we've received 12 folks, 7 from Syria and 5 from Yemen. So we're really excited about that. With the future of resettlement, we anticipate seeing a shift from the federal government towards more opportunities for community sponsorship. And a little background on that, prior to the Refugee Admissions Act of 1980, which really standardized refugee resettlement through the use of resettlement agencies such as IRC, resettlement was largely conducted privately through community groups or individuals. And so the summer of 2021, when 76,000 Afghans were evacuated to the US, the government made co-sponsorship an option. And co-sponsorship is a model where groups can organize within 100 miles of a resettlement agency to sort of take on the responsibility of the resettlement agency to resettle people and under the supervision of the resettlement agency. How many times can I say resettlement agency in one sentence? It's a mouthful. And so during this time, they made that an option, and we had a group in Helena who organized, and they were able to resettle 20 individuals in Helena. They were the only group that did that, but we had interest from communities all over the state, which was really, really exciting. Additionally, with the crisis in Ukraine, the federal government's response is the Uniting for Ukraine program. So Ukrainian refugees won't be coming through resettlement offices, but rather through individuals in the community who sign up to sponsor families. And so far in the state of Montana, we've had about 150 people sign up from all over. So that's really positive. So yeah, we see a lot of support, not just in Missoula, but throughout the state. And that makes me really, really hopeful for the future of resettlement in Missoula. So thank you very much.
So before I turn it back over to Brad, I'd like to pose one question to our panelists. That is really loud, very sensitive. So one of the questions that I think many may have or have had recently with the war in Ukraine is, where are the Ukrainian refugees? And do they, how do they come to other countries? Do they come through the same process that other refugees would come to Missoula or would come to the United States through? And how is that path maybe different?
Absolutely. You want me to?
Yeah.
Well, we can both.
We can both. We'll both just chit-chat back and forth. Maybe this one's so loud that we can just... Figured out.
Oh.
There. That one's super loud, so I think we'll be able to hear all of us. Well, as Sarah was saying, it is a different path for Ukrainians to come. Part of the reasoning behind that is everyone still remains hopeful that the war in Ukraine is not a permanent condition. And, many folks, even refugees that have been in the system for years, their first choice is to go back home. And I think for right now with the conflict in Ukraine, well, this most recent conflict in Ukraine being as new as it is, there is still hope among the Ukrainian people and our government that if they are offered a temporary protected status and a path to come to the U.S., that they will still be able to return to Ukraine. So Ukrainians are coming with just a temporary, like I said, temporary protected status. And it doesn't necessarily give them a path to staying here permanently or a path to citizenship like a refugee who came through resettlement would be provided. The same was the case for the Afghans that came. They came under the Afghan Protection Act. And so in the case of the Afghan folks, that is now obviously developing into a much longer thing. And many, many folks, their protected status is just about to expire, and they, wouldn't have a path to be here, except for they are now applying for asylum. So that 76,000 folks that Sarah talked about coming to the U.S., 108 who came here are all somewhere in the process of applying to us for asylum in order to stay and get that permanent status. What is really incredibly special about Montana is that through soft landing, through the IRC, through the university, we have organized a pro bono lawyer across the state for every single Afghan that has come. We're the only state that's done that. So cheers to it. And there are Afghan folks in Billings, in Kalispell, and Helena did the co-sponsorship with IRC, but there were other co-sponsors that happened across the state too. So for Uniting for Ukraine, it's much the same, only it's even more heavily weighted on private individual sponsorship. So you don't have to get the group together. You have private sponsorship options. A lot of that originated with Ukrainian families that are already here, directly connected with people back home. So it wasn't at first like this blanket, like, hey, I just want to raise my hand for anybody. It was these direct connections. There are Ukrainian families in Montana, and there's a gal that actually gets to come to Helena next week, which is really exciting. We have already families working with soft landing through our youth program. And so The funny thing about it is, though, that like because it's not held by the state, because it's only held by the federal government, we have this like random number, not random, but we have this number, but nobody knows who any of the sponsors are. There's no database that holds all of that we have access to, that holds their names and addresses and phone numbers. There's no way for them to find us or us to find them. So right now it's just kind of like one by one, case by case. Like even our state refugee coordinator doesn't have that information of who those hundreds of people are that provided sponsorship. So I don't know, was that kind of what you were, yeah.
Yeah, and just to back that up, yeah, IRC, unlike folks coming through the refugee admissions program, we don't get notice or notification when a Ukrainian family or individual fleeing has come to Montana. And if they do happen to find us and connect with us, we can enroll them in some of those services, like the match grant employment service and that sort of thing. But other than that, it's a big question mark.
So we're doing that like fun grassroots thing where we're like connecting with all the people that we have ever talked to across the state and being like, let's keep each other informed and let's build our own database, and so that we can help support the families if they need it. They might be falling into, aunts and uncles and they're like, dude, we're set, thanks. Or they might not be, so we're here if they need us. They probably wouldn't say dude. Bro, if I talk like my 7-year-old, I'm like, bro, we're set.
Great presentations, thank you. It's time for table talk. In my mind, it is among the richest part of the City Club experience. For those of you who don't know, the way this works is that everyone at your table will introduce yourselves to each other and then come up with a question. There are 3 rules of table talk. The first rule is keep it civil. The second rule is keep it short. Please try not to make statements or pontificate about your opinion on anything. We're here to learn from our presenters and each other. And the third rule of City Club Table Talk is if you're a part of the press, please save your questions for afterwards. I think our panelists will be able to stick around for a little while. Other than that, take 10 minutes, come up with a question, and we'll have someone go around the room at that time, and you can ask all or any of the panelists, and we'll hear from them again. Thanks. All right, it's about that time. I hope everyone came up with a question for their table. It turns out there's a 4th rule of table talk, and that is please stand up and introduce yourself when Dave comes around with the microphone to ask your question. And he's right back there.
Nancy Picard. I'm with Partners Hope Foundation. We're building an end-of-life care center and hospice center. And we had several questions. But I'm going to only ask 2. How do you measure success? And how are the churches in town who used to do a lot of this work continuing to be involved in resettlement for the refugees?
Loud mic is on again. I think we probably measure success differently due to government contracts and not obligated to do government contracts. But I think that's a really good question. And I don't know that there is an answer for it that is succinct. And I'll obviously you have your organization's answer. I think a lot of the times, for a nonprofit, it's measured in like how many people accessed our programs, how many volunteers engaged, how long have people engaged with us. So we have all of that, and we report out on those numbers to our funders and in a year-end impact report. But we also have the joy of measuring success by like office visits, that when people come after they've like gotten their driver's license and they've worked really, really hard on it, and in the country that they came from, women aren't allowed to drive. And we measure that success in people that walk through the door and invite us to their citizenship, which Wednesday, I get to go to 2 more. So we have a very different way of looking at success, I think, than digging deep into those numbers, although they are incredibly important because they tell a story of access, right? So access is incredibly important. But I do like to steer away from this very American ideal of success as being achievement and, all of these higher goals. People are working towards those, but people are starting from nothing, absolutely nothing, and not only zero financial resources, but culturally and understanding how our systems work. It's just totally different. And so even 7 years into this, this idea of success story is kind of hard to speak around because there's just so much success that isn't caught up in that. Yeah. But numbers are important, and you guys do have to really hone in on that.
Yeah, so, I'll scooch that. So, because, we are contracted with the federal government, we are required to not only report certain metrics, but meet certain metric requirements. And as long as we do that, I guess the government considers us successful. But to echo what Mary said, success is one of those concepts that it looks different for every single individual. And sure, we might see those, ideas that come to mind when you say the word success. We've seen people buy cars and buy houses and start businesses and entrepreneurial endeavors. But the quieter moments of life that maybe not everybody witnesses, success, again, is, somebody logging on to Northwestern Energy's website to pay their energy bill for the first time without help from our housing team. Or, you said earlier that the bus and learning to navigate the bus system is a, freedom to move about the city without being reliant on somebody for transportation. And those are the things that we know are happening. We probably don't see every single moment, but those are equally important.
And any moms and dads in the room know it's harder in the winter to get your kids on the bus. Took me a good 20 minutes to get the snow pants on today. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So at least, again, faith-based communities are some of those 30-some partner organizations that Mary mentioned earlier. And we have a lot of volunteers from various churches volunteering and working with the people that we serve. We have churches that donate storage space for us so that we can store in-kind items that we don't have room for in our office. We have churches who also volunteer meeting spaces if we're fully booked up or don't have any available meeting spaces. I'm probably forgetting some stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to mention 2 specific churches. One is Missoula Alliance Church. They, many of the Congolese families that came to Missoula found Missoula Alliance Church, and they found a home there. And they've been able to build out an incredible programming. They have 2 full-time basic caseworkers that work with families. They've bought a house that's in an accessible place for folks that they call their welcome house, and they run all sorts of really cool programming out of there, partnering with the IRC on Afghan women's groups and Syrian women's groups. And they've just done a spectacular job. And then I would say our sweet home for United We Eat is with First United Methodist Church. Thanks, Jana. And they've been incredible, not just supporting that program, but they have a mentor team that has worked with many families. Started out with an Eritrean family, they worked with a Congolese family, and there's other churches too that have pulled together kind of groups of people to work at first with us, but then the mentor team switched over to the IRC. And while it's not a formal process, because now the resettlement agency holds that formal process, where it used to be the churches really did in the past, and actually 7 out of the 9 resettlement agencies are faith-based, so it's World Relief and Catholic Charities and Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services.
Jewish Family Services.
Yeah, Jewish CIA, yeah, that one.
That one.
And so a lot of that faith base remains now in the resettlement world, but probably as private sponsorship and co-sponsorship models grow, there probably is going to be a lot more room for churches to be formally involved in that work, and we just kind of have to see what will happen. Yeah. No.
I'm Leslie McShane from the Missoula YMCA. And I think the question we had was, what is the best way for people and organizations to reach out and become integrated in your work in the best, so that we're meeting the most needs and doing it in the most meaningful way?
Good question. We were discussing that up here while you all were chatting amongst yourselves. And that's one of those hard questions where there's not a super clear answer. I guess go for it.
Well, I think a lot of our work is so incredibly relationship-based with individuals and families. We don't have a lot of opportunities for like kind of one-off volunteering. And that's been a challenge for our community. People that get involved need to get involved. There are options for that. Don't get me wrong, we work with hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, both of our organizations, each year, in really incredibly meaningful ways. I'm literally looking at so many of you in the audience. But in terms of one-off opportunities, it's a lot harder. But I think the question you're asking too is organizations that want to be more integrated and involved, like the Y. I think a really great place to start is by reaching out to the IRC and getting involved in quarterly consultations. And so, do you mind if I talk about them a little bit?
Please do.
The IRC, as part of their contract with the government, must provide quarterly consultations, so for each year. All sorts of partners and stakeholders come to those. So, really important partners everyone's an important partner, but Missoula County Public Schools is there, the Lifelong Learning Center's there, the health department's there, transportation folks, housing folks. So it's just a way for our community to check in every couple of months with resettlement and how do people get involved, what are they doing, and us to keep in the loop with each other. And I think that those are really important spaces. So that might be one place to start, is requesting hey, could we possibly hop into quarterly consultations? They happen over Zoom, and just listen for a few times. A lot of people bring us ideas, and depending on what our clients are asking and what the families need, we can totally accommodate and work through those. Sometimes it's not yet something someone has asked, and so we have to be really careful not to do mission creep ourselves, because we only have so much capacity. But yeah, I would definitely say reach out to either one of us if you have ideas or thoughts on how you might want to engage more. What is challenging is if people only want to engage with us to promote their own program's diversity. I would hesitate to do that, because it makes it really challenging for us to navigate that space with you, and you're can you just send us a couple Black people because we want to take a picture for our brochure, which has happened. So it's all well-meaning, and I think that we obviously want to be in productive spaces with everybody, and there's nothing that exists without partnership, nothing. So don't hesitate to reach out, but we might just not be able to do it with you. Sorry, this is a little bit of
Lorraine Bond, retired social worker. And our question is actually a two-parter also. First, we're wondering, with the housing crunch that we have right now, how are you finding houses for people to live in? And then the second part was, with the political climate, is there much pushback from people in the community or the surrounding area for bringing immigrants into Montana?
I can speak a little bit to the housing piece, and you're absolutely right. There is a shortage of affordable, safe and sanitary housing in Missoula, and especially when we have families who are 6 and 7 members, then finding like a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment or home, that's really, really difficult. I'm really proud to say that everyone who has arrived in Missoula, barring 2 arrivals we had last week, has permanent housing. So through our housing logistics and coordinator, she's amazing, through hard work, dedication, and just constantly reaching out to people. I think we've had a lot of success with private landlords, people who want to help our cause and have houses to rent to us, and a few great property management companies in Missoula, and again, partnerships that have been really, really willing to work with us. So, so far, so good. We'll just continue to address those challenges as they come up. And yeah, I think I'll let Mary speak to the political climate. You probably have a little more experience with that than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does, and it does exist in small doses, but it doesn't exist in a way that it impacts or halts any of our work in terms of pushback. I think, like, number one, most important is just to state that, like, everyone actually has a role to play in the work we do and how we go about our day and how we educate ourselves and how we look at the world. And neither one of our organizations are closed-door organizations to questions and ideas and thoughts, and even folks that, want to say what they don't like about what we do. Like, we all learn from that. We're not political organizations. There are times where we need to get involved in, supporting different things. We do have a legislative session coming up, and that's always, we're always collaborating with folks on that. That's where some really great churches come in for advocacy for refugees in the legislative session across the state. So there is a little bit of that, and there has been a little bit of that, but it was never to the level that that maybe was portrayed. We just have had so much support from the minute that this has been an idea. It's literally been hanging on to the freight train of this community to make it happen. I call myself the accidental executive director because that is, like, absolutely the case. Like, I'm just hanging on here. And it is our community and our state that has driven this work forward. So while, yes, there are folks that still have questions and there are folks that, don't necessarily agree with resettlement, the door is open to all. And it's open to that feedback, and it's open to having that conversation. And really the goal in the end is to create a welcoming community for refugees. It's not to get everybody to agree with every single thing we've ever done, but it's so that when a refugee walks through that door into a new place of employment, or a refugee walks into their new home and their neighbor, great story, John Barber, I sat with him many, many, many times before refugees were even here, and just, he was adamant about we were not doing the right thing for the community. And John is a dear friend now, and we still meet up at Ruby's for cinnamon rolls every now and then. But he literally, the second family that came to Missoula was his direct neighbor in his apartment building. Like, they could touch doors from each other. And he welcomed them in, and they spent holidays together. And, his political views never changed. What he thought of what we were doing never changed. But he welcomed that family. And I think that has happened so many times. And I think that as Missoulians and as Montanans, we have this hospitality. It exists. We're very independent nature, but at the same time, like, we've had to survive with each other, and we see it over and over again. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's such a minor thing.
And I'd like to add to that by also just recognizing again over this past year the outpour of support, not just from Missoula. I think a lot of people who maybe don't agree with what we're doing will say, oh, you know, that liberal Missoula, the rest of the state doesn't agree. But we have had an outpour of support across the state, which is really encouraging as we move forward.
And I'll say that state support has always been there, because I've been overwhelmed by it. Like, how do I do this in Kalispell? How do I do this in Billings? How do I do what you did in Helena and Bozeman and Butte? And the Afghans coming on the program that they came, and the ability for them to land in those places has more visibly shown that.
Sure. Yeah. Again.
Yeah.
Just I've seen it. I guess personally,
yeah, totally.
I don't have the history.
Totally. Yeah. So that state support, just like you said, Sarah, is so important.
Hi, my name is Lauren Fritcha, and one of the questions our table circled around is, what are some of the obstacles you guys have encountered in your work in Missoula, but also perhaps some of the creative solutions that you've found to those obstacles here?
I think one thing that comes to mind immediately is the language barrier, and a lot of organizations or like healthcare facilities that are state funded are required to have interpretation or translation services. And one obstacle we've run up against is some of these facilities either not having appropriate services or not being willing to get them to use them for our clients. And the language barrier is so important when you have people coming who maybe don't speak any English at all. And a story that kind of comes to mind that Soft Landing spearheaded an effort on was the driver manuals.
The good old DMV.
Yes, the DMV.
Yeah, the DMV.
So I can let you tell that story if you want.
Oh, no, go for it. Yeah.
So basically, when we had the people coming from Afghanistan, they speak Dari and Pashto are the languages. And they wanted to study for their driver's exams, but the manuals were not available in those languages. They were available in other languages, I believe.
Well, we had been working on it with Swahili before
Okay.
then and Arabic before
Okay.
then. So yeah, it was just another straw on the pile.
Yeah, exactly. But basically, due to their persistence, and I don't know who you got in contact with, but they were eventually translated so that these folks could have the materials they needed to study for their driver's tests. So.
Yeah, and I would just say, you know, we've talked a lot about the rosy side of things today, but there are challenges, absolutely. Like, this work is not easy. Just because it's hard, though, doesn't mean it's not something that we should do. You know, right now, currently, in Marmot, you could speak to this better than I could, but we have a lot of things that got laid in place during COVID times, and gosh, Eric could speak to this with his organization, and Susan. Like, there was a lot of extra support during COVID that's now being pulled. That's not, you know, that structures over the years have been built now for, and that COVID support is gone. So that money is going to have to come from somewhere else. You know, people got a Best Beginning scholarship for childcare that they only had to pay $10 a month. Per family, and that was just during COVID, and now we're going to go back to that sliding scale, and families are going to be on the hook for $700, $800, $900 health or childcare bills again every month. And you know, so there's always these little things, and again, it goes back to those partnerships, both private, public, troubleshooting, figuring out how do we do this. You know, we work really closely with the IRC, with Missoula Public Schools. When families first get here, they are often in temporary housing for a little bit, and they can't enroll in school yet. Or they can enroll in school, but they are not guaranteed a bus ride to school. And so Soft Landing volunteers provide that bus ride to school to make sure that kids aren't stuck at home for the time that it takes to get into permanent housing. So there's so many of those stories because, I mean, the struggle is real. There are incredible challenges in our community. And I think what's cool is that our community gets to be a part of that solution. And what we do in Missoula is not going to be the same that folks do in Seattle or Chicago or Georgia or wherever. Like, we get to build that program and those systems together.
Hi, I'm Mike Arnone. I'm a strategic communicator and brander for tech companies. This is my first time here, so thank you guys for your generosity. Two quick questions. One is, what can we do to help refugees manage increasing costs of living? And the other is, what are your stretch goals that we can help you with?
Thanks. Every single table has been sneaky. You guys, what happened to the one question rule? You all broke it. Kidding. The more the merrier. Now I've forgotten the questions. Too many jokes.
Rising costs.
Oh yeah, rising costs. Well, I think with housing, you guys have a housing fund. We, back when Afghans came, we raised a bunch of money from you all for Afghan families and new arrivals, and we were able to contribute $25,000 to your guys' housing fund. So that's one way I think that is really helpful, is when there are these rising costs and these pain points, one or the other of us is going to have like a little special temporary, hopefully temporary fund for that. You know, Sarah, you guys asked about housing, and Sarah talked about housing, and everybody's in it, but you're right, like it is more expensive. 5 years ago, people were getting into housing for $900 a month, and now there's no chance of that, right? And so some of that is supplemented for a while. Luckily, wages also have been raised to accommodate some of that. So now I'm talking about your work, you should probably talk about your work, but like now you guys don't place anybody in a job that's less than 15 an hour, where it used to be 12 an hour, you know, so the scale adjusts a little bit, but we're all feeling it. And groceries are super expensive. In the summer months, we work with Garden City Harvests and Tower Road Farms, and they give us a ton of extra produce, and we go around and we deliver it to marmots again. Hi, marmot. and families can come grab that. Yeah, that first question?
Yeah, so, I mean, really just reaching out to us and finding out what programs and support we can offer to people, and contributing either volunteer time or financially to those programs is super helpful. And I think too, for small business owners, if you are able and willing to hire refugees and pay decent wages, that's another way. We're always looking to build partnerships with employers in the community to offer more routes for people professionally to grow in. So that's another way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was your second?
Oh, our stretch goals.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, you don't want to get me started. I mean, wouldn't an international center be amazing that included all of our organizations, including the university, that had international focus of our work, complete with a restaurant and a huge teaching commercial kitchen that incubated small businesses? Wouldn't an art center, and yeah, you just
an economic empowerment,
economic
like micro
empowerment
lending,
center,
micro grant,
all under the
program.
same roof,
Yep.
where we could just like simmer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the pipe dream.
Anybody got a couple million for us?
Hi, Brian Deary, a citizen here, and the question is, refugees have a choice of where they are going to be relocated in the U.S. How is the decision made on where to go?
That's a great question. And the answer is they do not have a choice. And going back to the point at which they're still overseas in a refugee camp, if they are one of the less than 1% of all refugees, it's like less than 1% of 27.1 million refugees will be resettled in a third-party country like the U.S. And at the point it's decided that, you know, they will be resettled in a third-party country, they have no choice on where they go. And I actually don't know how that decision is made. It's made by the powers that be in UNHCR, the United Nations branch for refugees. And so that's my answer to that.
Yeah, and I would just echo that, except if it's in a case of family reunification,
Sure,
and sometimes that doesn't even work out. You know, the State Department does meet weekly with each of the resettlement agencies to say, like, okay, where do you have space? Who do you have space for? like Sarah mentioned, it's just a minute fraction of those displaced around the world that even get a shot at third country resettlement. And a lot of times they get that shot because they are on some sort of higher vulnerability level. So whether that's like a kid with a chronic medical condition, even something we think as like simple as asthma, like if there's not the medical care or facility to treat a child with a chronic medical condition, like that child's chance at survival is so low. Women at risk, so single moms, put into kind of, refugee camps are not the safest place, right? Out of the flame into the fire, out of the pan into the flame, whatever. And pot? Is it a pot?
Out of the pan and
something fire. Anyway.
We'll have to somebody Google it.
And so there's, there's these higher vulnerability levels, and most often those folks and then the family reunification folks are selected to go through the process of then getting screened and vetted by our own government in order to come to the United States. And so once that happens, the State Department and the resettlement agencies meet weekly to kind of say, well, this family really should go to Seattle because of the Children's Hospital there, and this family, this is an LGBTQ refugee, they should maybe go to a community in which, there's programming specific there for them. This family actually has no family ties and no defining things, so let's put them in this new place called Missoula. And, we get a lot of families right now that don't have that other familial support across the U.S. And sometimes people do, and they head to see their families. Not every family that has come has stayed. Some people hate the winters. Some people love the winters. A lot of the Afghan families, because there's such huge Afghan communities, other places in our nation, we just assumed like they'd just kind of come right through. That has not been the case. They've loved our mountains. It reminds them of home. They love the winters here. And they've really, really engaged as a community. So, anyway, I'm long-winded.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Pan into the fire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Out of the frying pan.
Mary, Sarah, and Donna, thank you so much for coming today. It's a great presentation, great questions from the audience. Thank you all. Thank you again to our sponsors, in particular, University of Montana, Blackfoot Communications, and First Security Bank. Our December 12th forum is a surprise work in progress, so check our website and Facebook page in the next week or two. In the meantime, have a happy Thanksgiving holiday and stay safe. That's it for today. Thank you so much.